This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Coffee Newsbreak, your place for condensed global coffee industry news, events, and resources posted daily. Find Coffee Newsbreak on Instagram at Coffee Newsbreak or check the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar. We are joined by Muki Yeung for episode 4 of our 5-part series on Kenyan coffee. And Muki is on the ground in Kenya most of the time. She's currently in Australia. And we today want to explore the idea of the impact of climate on Kenyan coffee, both as a commodity and as a market. I imagine that climate change is impacting, and we talked about this briefly, we've touched on this, that people or producers in Kenya are choosing different varietals because of a number of things, climate being one of those things. But I also imagine that climate is impacting the people who are producing, aside from their crop and the way that they approach life. So, Muki, how is climate and climate change impacting Kenyan coffee producers?
We start just with coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, not just in Kenya, but around the world, something that I noticed.
Mm-hmm.
People were really reliant on that coffee calendar. We could sort of expect when things would happen. And how that ties into the rest of the year, not just when people purchase or coffee's moved or sold or when it's harvested. Once coffee's sold, farmers will have access to money. Generally, when they have access to those funds is when they can access inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Then at that point, they're also reliant on how the weather is to how useful those inputs will be.
Mm-hmm.
Say you need to spray against rust. You have to do it at a certain time of the year when it will be most useful because that fungus will be more prevalent during certain kinds of weather, certain times of the year. If you're using certain fertilizers, you're very reliant on rain. It's sort of like taking a pill without drinking water. You need that water
right.
for the tree to be able to access or to break down those certain fertilizers. Many farms, small farms like this, don't have access to irrigation. They don't have access to mechanical equipment. And these inputs would have been expensive already. So you really only have one opportunity to do it, or otherwise it's all wasted.
Mm.
And traditionally, you could have been quite reliant on the times of year that you were to do these things. You know, you'll get your money at X month, and you can buy things at this month, and you'll begin applying or pruning or whatever this month, that month. But everything is gone out of whack. Like we used to be able to say that flowering happens here and that harvest will begin there. But it's not the case anymore. I think it's not just Kenya. It's worldwide that we see this. I was up in central Kenya recently, just before I came to Australia. I visited quite a number of small farms as well as cooperatives, and I got the same response, which is we're confused. The trees are confused. The weather's confused. We don't know what to do because we can't rely on what we used to know. It's all out of whack now. You look at a coffee tree there and it's going through every cycle all at once. It's flowering. There's green cherry, there's red cherry. We should not have any ripe cherry on the trees at this point, really. We're at the end of our early crop. It should have been a period where we would have had rains so that the main harvest should have developed. And then we should have begun harvesting the main crop for real towards the end of October, early November. But everything's changing. You can't really rely on the traditional calendar because of how the climate has been. And I think historically we used to be able to say, yeah, you have a bad year here and there. It's nature after all. But if you look at what's going on around the world, this is becoming a regular occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's been how many years has it been in Australia? Have you had crazy rains?
Oh, yeah. We're coming into our
How many
third year.
intense summers in Europe and in Northern America that it's not just an unusual thing to happen. It's
No.
becoming a regular occurrence. And we have to learn how to adapt. But unfortunately, like, okay, from this side, I feel like we have access to information, we have access to technology that can help us here. If
Mm-hmm.
it gets too hot, you put in a air conditioner or you figure things out in other ways,
Mm-hmm.
in Australia at least. But there, if you've dropped money on inputs and you've hired 100 people to help spray against rust on your farm, and suddenly the weather changes for the worst. You've just thrown money into the air, thrown it
Right.
into the fire. It's so costly. So people are not able to adapt quick enough to the changes. And while we have at the marketing agent level, we try to provide as much assistance as possible. There's been some fantastic technology in place where you can send SMS updates directly to a producer, to give them weather updates, to give them advice on what's happening that could affect them. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
prices of fertilizer are about to shoot up. It's a good time to buy now, or you should be applying this now, or doing this now. It's still early days. You know, it's a very traditional country that's a bit slow to adapt to things sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're trying to convince someone to spend their money now, they don't want to feel pushed at the same time. So yeah,
Some
takes
people
some
might
time to adapt.
say that an unpredictable year may mean that, perhaps instead of having one harvest, we've got 2 or 3 harvests now. And that's great because we've got an increase in yield, right? I'm suspecting it's not that straightforward.
No, no. Well, people's lives aren't just wrapped up in coffee either. They need to be doing other things. Quite often, a lot of these producers are also trying to produce the food that they eat for the year.
Mm.
Sometimes they also don't. I think a lot of people are not aware, but certainly in Kenya, many farmers aren't only farmers.
Mm.
They've we want people to be able to have a stable income, and quite some of these people, even if they do own a farm, they might work as a labor teacher in the city doing something. It's so they were reliant on these seasons as knowing when to hire extra staff or to be present.
Mm.
And uh, this
And
has
all of that's
definitely changed
changed.
things for them. Yeah.
What's the flow-on effect and the impact from a pricing perspective that you can see over the next couple of years for all this climate shifting?
Well, I think quality will always dictate price.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like we can ask for a below average coffee to be double what it's worth, but it will also be dependent on demand. If we have a shift in production, which we will,
Mm-hmm.
it will likely drop this year. Prices will naturally be higher. But I'm feel very strongly that we will still be able to produce quality in Kenya.
Do you think that the situation with regards to climate change is going to force decisions away from coffee production?
Yes,
Okay, tell me more.
yes. I think when it comes down to it, people need to feed themselves, and that will be their focus. If
Right.
they need to put more money into producing their own food
Mm-hmm.
or time or attention, that's just going to be the case. So while people need cash in hand, they need to feed themselves first.
Yep. Yeah, wow. Which sets us up for a really great discussion in our next episode, we're going to talk about the future challenges. Like, what are the challenges that face Kenyan coffee production and the Kenyan value chain over like the next decade? So let's have that conversation. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.